I'm here to report on a great development in California. We now have one of the highest minimum wages in the country. Effective January 1st, 2017, the minimum wage, which is now $10, goes up to $10.50. And by January 1st, 2022, every worker, with the exception of some workers and small employers, will have a minimum wage of $15. Now that sounds great, but right now the minimum wage in Australia is almost $16 an hour. So we're sort of behind a lot of other countries. For smaller employers, that minimum wage increases by $1 a year less. So by January 1st, 2023, every worker in California, every worker, with just a couple very small exceptions, will have to be paid at least $15 an hour. This means when you hire a babysitter, that babysitter will have to be paid $15 an hour. The only exceptions in the law are apprentices who are indentured in a state-approved apprenticeship program, and if you're working for your mother, your father, or your spouse. Other than that, every worker in California gets the minimum wage. This is a great development. Jerry Brown signed the law. There's a couple of catches in it. One catch which is very good, and one catch which may not make any difference. One is the governor insisted that there be an off-ramp or a delay if there's a budget crisis, which we don't expect. But that was a condition of him signing it just in case there's a budget crisis. In part because he agreed that this minimum wage increase would apply to all state workers, which comes out of the budget. The second thing that's very important about this law is that it requires it to be indexed. So after it goes up to $15 an hour, we don't have to go back to the legislature and ask for more money. Every year, based on the rise in the consumer price index, the minimum wage will increase after January of 2022. And that's a great development. But this development doesn't just affect the base wage, it has other effects. For example, under California law, when you're required to bring your tools to the job site or to work someplace, you have to be paid double minimum wage. So after January of 2022, if you're required to bring tools, your base wage will have to be twice minimum wage, which will be $30 an hour. So this will have an impact on those workers. Another important impact of this increase in minimum wage is something called non-productive time. California law, which is different than federal law, says you have to be paid for each and every hour worked. This means if you show up at the job and the employer says, I don't have work for you, hang around for an hour, you have to be paid minimum wage for that hour. And now we have this codified in California law in the labor code that all this non-productive time or non-allocated time has to be paid at minimum wage. So this, for example, affects farm workers. Farm workers, for example, often have time when they're not working, auto mechanics, and even truck drivers who are paid by the mile. They may end up coming to a place to deliver, and they're told to wait, and now under the law they have to be paid minimum wage for those hours. So right now it's $10. Goes up to $15. This will make a substantial difference for those workers who are paid a piece rate because they'll have to be paid minimum wage. It also will have a dramatic impact upon salaried workers in California. There's an exemption for certain salaried workers, but that's based upon paying them minimum wage for 40 hours a week. And so right now it's about $41,000. That amount will go up to over $62,000, effective with the increase in the minimum wage. Now, there are developments in other places, for example. Believe it or not, there are 5 states that don't have a minimum wage. One of them is Louisiana. And there, New Orleans tried to adopt its own minimum wage, and the state legislatures, Republicans of course, blocked that. But here in California, we have the reverse. Here, local jurisdictions can adopt higher minimum wages. That's not likely to be as necessary now that the state has implemented this really glorious increase to $15 an hour. Now, it isn't what everybody wanted. There were those who wanted to move it up to $15 an hour immediately, and people deserve that wage. But this is a political compromise. It works, and it's now the law of California. And the most important thing I want to emphasize about this is it's a lesson for the rest of the country. New York now has a higher minimum wage, and I foresee every state eventually increasing their minimum wage, and if they don't, the federal government will do it. So go out and enforce it. Thank you.